Hello again, everyone, and welcome to our daily message. Yesterday I spoke on chapter 1 of the book by Joel Goldsmith, The Infinite Way. He wrote, "The way of security, harmony, and health is through attaining some measure of spiritual consciousness. Those who have acquired some degree of spiritual consciousness have proven in that measure the reality of spirit." In other words, our outer world will always reflect the measure to which we know and understand spirit in us, as us. He writes, "Be assured, inner peace will come as one turns to the spiritual consciousness of life, and an outer calm will follow in one's affairs. The outer world will conform to the inner awareness of truth." So today we are discussing chapter 2 in the book, The Infinite Way, Spiritual Illumination. He writes that spiritual illumination enables us to discern the spiritual reality when a human problem might be in front of us. The development of spiritual consciousness begins when we realize that what we see, taste, touch, or smell here in front of us is not the reality of things. What he's asking us to do is to disregard outer appearances entirely. Now, this can or may be hard for many of us to do because we're so caught up in what's happening around us. And yet, as he writes, if we do disregard the outer appearances entirely, he states that the first array of spiritual illumination finds its way to us. The more we grow in our spiritual understanding, the less we become connected to the appearances of what is happening around us. He writes that our progress in spirit is in proportion to the illumination that takes place in us, as we do move away from connecting with appearances. Each time we choose to look to God, to spirit for the truth, we pull away from the earthly plane of what he calls manifest form, and we move higher into the dimension of spirit and into a greater degree of spiritual illumination. Goldsmith writes that this spiritual illumination first brings peace to us. Then we feel a greater confidence and assurance for our daily life. He writes it brings rest from the world's worries, and then all good begins to flow to us through grace. He writes, when we begin to live by grace, we possess all as the Spirit of God. We do not need to go and get our good because we know at our core level that we already have all good. He writes, in the light of truth, the greatest earthly happiness and triumph are as nothing, whereas the treasures of soul have a glory unknown and unfathomable by sense. This spiritually illumined human being will recognize that because no good can come or go, that because spiritual activity is always of the nature of fulfillment, that because their illumination has revealed the reality of things, they are now anchored in their soul, in God consciousness, and spiritual peace, security, and serenity. With spiritual illumination, we begin to understand that we really can fear no change in the outer world because the outer is but the reflection of the allness within each one of us. We know that we are safe, that we are an individual through infinite spiritual consciousness, embodying all good, and we don't need to worry about what we experience around us, but instead all we have to do is return back to our oneness and the state of consciousness with Source. He writes that illumined consciousness reveals the real self, capital S self, the I that I am. unlimited, unfettered, untroubled, harmonious, and free. This selfhood, capital S selfhood, is revealed as we go within ourselves each day to sit and learn to listen and to watch. Instead of having anxious thoughts about the work of the day or the events happening around us, we let our soul, our divine spirit, go ahead of us to smooth and prepare the way. We let this divine influence remain constantly with us, as he writes, to safeguard every step from the illusions of the sense world. He writes, when consciousness is alive with truth and love, it destroys all sense of fear, doubt, hate, envy, disease, and discord. And this pure consciousness is felt by everyone we meet, and it lightens the load we carry. It's impossible to be the light of the world and not dispel the darkness of those about us. Spiritual illumination reveals that we are not mortals and not even human beings, but that we are pure spiritual beings, divine consciousness, self-sustaining light, all-inclusive mind. Christ consciousness beholds God everywhere, shining through the midst of all of our personal sense of things. It recognizes nothing to be reformed, no sick to heal, no poor to enrich. Spiritual illumination dispels this false concepts or images of finite sense and reveals all being as God appearing. He writes that this inner presence of which we are aware is truth itself, interpreting itself to us as presence, power, companion, light, peace, healing, prosperity, as the Christ. The consciousness of this inner being is the result of our greater spiritual illumination, of our cultivated spiritual consciousness. This truth is the God who heals all things and goes before us to make our paths smooth in life. This truth is wealth and appears as our abundant supply. He writes that no human circumstance or condition can lessen our income and wealth while we abide in this consciousness of the presence of love. And the key element here is the word abide. We must sit in this presence and power of God daily to be connected with that source. His recommendation of 10 minutes several times a day, rather than 1 or 2 long periods, keeps us constantly in our conscious connection with Source. He writes that spiritual illumination can be attained by living constantly in the consciousness of the presence of perfection, by the continual translation of the visible picture into reality. We are being faced with discordant appearances all through our days and nights, and these must immediately be translated to our understanding of spirit within us. He writes that every incident of our daily experience offers fresh opportunities to use our spiritual understanding, and each use of spiritual understanding results in greater spiritual perception, which in turn reveals more and more of the light of truth. John chapter 8 reads, "Pray without ceasing, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." He writes, "Convert the pictures and incidents of daily life into the new language of spirit, and consciousness will expand until conversion occurs without even taking thought. It becomes a habitual state of consciousness, a constant awareness of truth. He writes, it's only in this way can we find our lives unfolding harmoniously from the center of our being without taking conscious thought. Instead of our existence being a continual round of demonstrations, it becomes the natural, harmonious, joyful unfolding of good. Instead of repeated efforts to make good come to us, our every good begins to unfold into view from the depths of our own being without conscious effort, either physical or mental. He writes, we are no longer dependent on person or circumstance or even on our own personal effort. Spiritual illumination enables us to relax our personal efforts and rely more and more on divinity enfolding and unfolding and revealing itself as us. So my question is this what you would like? Divinity revealing itself to you without any effort on your part for your good? Goldsmith suggests the 10 minutes daily, constantly throughout the day. And when our attention is constantly on Source, Source then goes before us to lighten our day. So I invite you again to take time each day and be the light of Spirit.